All right, for those of you that maybe you were gone, maybe you were sick, maybe you were busy and not paying attention, I don't know. But anyone that didn't pick up the quadratic formula, this is section 4.5, and it's all about using this big, messy formula called the quadratic formula. And at first, it can be a little intimidating, and you'll get over that pretty quick because it's actually really easy to use. Your calculator does all the work. You just have to make sure to type it in correctly. So what the quadratic formula is it gives me a way to solve any quadratic equation. We've been solving things like x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0. That's really easy to solve because the numbers are nice, right? We can just do big X. Well, some of you, that's easy to do, but we can do the big X. We can solve this one pretty easily. We've also been doing things like 7x squared equals 49, and you just do railroad tracks and solve this one. So all of the things that we've done so far work, especially when the numbers are nice. But what happens in the real world is you start having to do problems with not nice numbers, all right? You start getting things like 3.795x squared minus 113x plus 17 over 4 equals 982, right? All of a sudden, the numbers aren't pretty numbers. They don't look good. And trying to use the methods you've learned don't work very well when the numbers aren't pretty. So the good news is there is a formula that you can use. The nice thing about the formula is it always works. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. You can use the numbers to get an answer. So all of these other methods that we've learned, now you have the option which way you want to do it. You don't have to use the big X if you don't want to use the big X. You can use this quadratic formula. So what the quadratic formula is if I have an equation, and we're going to call it ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. If I have an equation that's written in this form, and a is just some number, b is just some number, c is just some number, I can use the quadratic formula to get the solutions to the equation. And the quadratic formula looks like this. X equals negative b plus and minus. You're going to put both of them on top of each other. And then there's this great big square root. And then a b squared minus 4ac. All of that is the top of a fraction. We're not even done yet. The bottom of the fraction has 2 times a on it. All right, so there is a lot going on in this formula. The good news is you plug in the numbers, you hit enter on your calculator, and you get the answer. All right. We just have to be careful how we plug in these different numbers. So let's look at an example and get right into them. This example right here, 2x squared minus 5x plus 3 equals 0. Well, this is already set equal to 0, which is the first requirement. I can't do this if it's not equal to 0. But now that it's set equal to 0, I know that whatever's in front of x squared is my a, whatever's in front of x, that's my b, and whatever's in front, or I guess whatever's all by itself, that's my c value. So a is equal to 2, b is equal to negative 5, and c is equal to 3. Now that I know that's what a, b, and c are, I just plug them in. X equals, now my formula has a negative at the front, and then b. And in this case, b is a negative 5. And I'm going to put that in parentheses. Every time I plug a number in for one of these letters, I'm going to put it in parentheses so that my calculator does the math correctly, okay? And then I've got plus, minus, then this great big square root. And I'm going to do a parenthesis. And again, I've got to put b, so negative 5 squared minus 4. And then the formula wants a and c. So I'm going to put a parenthesis and put a, then another parenthesis and put c. And on the bottom of the formula is 2 times a. So everywhere there was a letter, this was B, right? This was B. This was A. This was C. This was A. Everywhere I plugged in a letter, I went ahead and used parentheses. And the only reason I'm doing that, well, the main reason I'm doing that is I want the calculator to do the math correctly, okay? So what I want to do before, this is a big equation. There are so many places that you can make mistakes typing this in the calculator. So if you kind of break it down piece by piece, you're a lot less likely to make mistakes. So what I like to do is I like to clean up 3 different parts. I like to clean, well, I don't want to erase it. I like to clean up this part right here. I like to clean up the bottom. And I like to clean up this underneath mess. Now notice I didn't highlight the square root because I'm leaving the square root alone. I just want to do the number underneath the square root. So when I rewrite this, instead of negative 5, that's just positive 5. And then I have plus, minus, and I still have a square root. But what I want to do is take everything in that underneath that square root, and I want to type it in my calculator. So in my calculator, I'm going to type parenthesis, -5, parenthesis, squared, minus 4, parenthesis, 2, parenthesis, 3. I'm going to type that exactly into my calculator to get a number. And when I do, oh, geez, what am I going to get? 25, I don't have a calculator. 24, oh, that's nice. That comes out to be the number 1. So the square root is still there because I haven't put that in my calculator yet, but all of that mess underneath it just comes out to be a 1. And then on the bottom of my fraction, 2 times 2 is just 4, okay? And I like to set it up like this because now when I plug it in my calculator, it's really easy for me to tell if I made a mistake. If I try to plug this entire thing in my calculator, I'm gonna make mistakes along the way. Now it's a nice, clean, easy formula to plug in my calculator. But I'm actually gonna have to plug it in my calculator twice. A lot of you are asking, but there's a plus and a minus. How am I supposed to do that? Well, you actually can't do them at the same time. You're gonna do this 2 different times. In your calculator, you're gonna plug in, actually first you're gonna make a fraction, and on the top, you're gonna put a 5, and then you're going to only use the plus. And you're going to put a square root 1 and a 4 on the bottom. And you're going to hit enter. Then you're going to do this question again. You're going to put a 5 with a minus square root 1 on the top. And then a 4 on the bottom of the fraction and hit enter. When you do that, each of these is going to give you an answer. So 5 plus square root 1 divided by 4 comes out to be 3/2. So x equals 3/2. There's one of my solutions. 5 minus square root 1 divided by 4 comes out to be 1. So x equals 1 is my other solution. And that's okay. It's all right if I get 2 solutions. That's why there's a plus and a minus, because parabolas like to cross in 2 places. They don't always do it, but they like to. They like to try to do it. All right, let's do another example. Let's go ahead and do number, I don't know. Let's do number 2. All right, we got 1/2 x squared plus x minus 10 equals 0. So it already equals 0. Perfect. So that means that a is equal to 1/2. Actually, you know what? I don't want it to be a half. I want to write 0.5 instead. So a equals 0.5, b equals 1. I know you don't see it, but there's a 1 in front of the x, and c is equal to -10. Now that I know what a, b, and c are, I'm going to plug them into my quadratic formula. X equals, and I know I'm going to end up with this great big fraction, negative, and b goes in parentheses, plus or minus the square root of b. So I do, whoops, not b. I do 1 in parentheses squared minus 4 times a, which is 0.5, times c, which is -10. And then on the bottom, I'm going to do 2 times 0.5. So now that I wrote it out, I want to clean up different parts. I want to clean up this part. I want to clean up the bottom. And I'm not going to touch the square root, but I want to clean up what's underneath the square root. So when I do that, I end up with x equals -1 plus minus square root. 1 squared minus all of that, I think, comes out to be 21. And then, is that right? Yeah, that's right. And then on the bottom, I end up with a 1. Now this is nice, clean, simple. I can plug it into my calculator. So I'm going to make a fraction in my calculator. I'm going to put -1 plus the square root of 21 on top and a 1 on the bottom. And I'm also going to type in another fraction, -1 minus the square root of 21 with a 1 on the bottom. And when I do this, I end up with, I really should have brought my calculator. I know it's not nice. I think this is like 3.582, I think, is what that one comes out to be. And this one comes out to be -5.582, or something close to that. I might have my decimals off just a little bit. So those are my two answers for x. All right? Let's do one more. Number 4, 4x squared minus 4x equals -1. Now this one's a little bit different because it's not equal to 0. So before I do anything, I need to add 1 to the right to make this go away. So that means I have to add 1 to the left. So I end up with 4x squared minus 4x plus 1 is equal to 0. Now I can find my a, b, and c. A equals 4, B equals -4, and C equals 1. Let's plug them in. X equals, if I'm going too fast, which I probably am, there's a wonderful pause button. It works really well. I'm going to have a big fraction, right? So on top, I've got negative and then a parenthesis with B inside. Then a plus minus with a square root. And under the square root, I've got to put -4 squared. And notice the -4 is in parentheses every time, minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is 1. And all of that gets divided by 2 times 4. All right, now I clean things up. I clean up this part, I clean up the bottom, and I clean up what's underneath the square root. Again, I'm not touching the square root. I'm just cleaning up what's underneath it. So x equals -4 is +4 plus minus the square root. Now, -4 squared is 16. And then I'm minusing 16. So that actually comes out to be 0. And on the bottom, I get an 8. Now, this one's kind of interesting because in the other questions, I took like the square root of 21 and I took the square root of 1 and I ended up with 2 answers, right? Which makes sense because you've already learned if you ever square root a positive number, you get 2 answers. And that rule still applies. But in this case, I'm square rooting a 0. I'm not square rooting a positive number. I'm square rooting a 0. And in the past, we learned that if I ever square root a 0, I only get 1 answer. So let's see if that still happens. I'm going to do 2 different things on my calculator. I'm going to type in 4 plus the square root of 0 divided by 8. And I'm going to type in 4 minus square root of 0. Sorry, not divided by 8, over 8 in a fraction. When I type those in, which you should probably be doing right now, I get 1/2 for both of those equations. Well, 1/2 and 1/2 are the same thing. So x equals 1/2 is my only answer. So this idea that the square root of 0 only gives me 1 answer is still very true. Which makes me wonder what happens if I have, and I'm just going to make up some numbers here. Let's say I have x equals -4 plus or minus the square root of -4 squared minus 4 times 7 times 2. And all of that is going to be divided by 2 times 7. All right, when I clean this one up, this I clean up, this I clean up, this I clean up. So x equals positive 4 plus or minus the square root. Negative 4 squared is 16. Minus 4 times 7, which is 28, times 2, which is 56. So I'm doing 16 minus 56. So this becomes, this becomes negative 40 on the inside, and on the bottom I've got 14. Now, in the past, we learned that if I try to take the square root of a negative, my calculator gets mad at me, and it tells me domain error. And guess what? It's going to do the same thing now. It's going to tell you domain error, and that means the same thing it meant before. That means there are no solutions to this equation. So I would just say that there's no solutions. I know I made this one up, but if this was your problem, that's what you would say. There's no solutions to this equation, all right? Okay, one more concept, and then I'll let you go ahead and get started on the homework. We're going to skip the story problems for now. We'll work on those together. But I want to focus on part of the quadratic formula, and it's this part right here, the b squared minus 4ac. Whoops, I wrote 4 because I said 4. This piece right here, b squared minus 4ac. This is a really special part of the quadratic formula. This has its own name. It's called the discriminant. And it determines how many solutions I'm going to get, which you've already seen. Depending on what b squared minus 4ac, what kind of number that comes out to be, it's going to change how many solutions I get. And we already did that. In the last example, that b squared minus 4ac came out to be a negative number, which meant I had no solutions. In the example before that, b squared minus 4ac came out to be 0, and that gave me 1 answer. And before that one, b squared minus 4ac was a positive 21, and I ended up with 2 different answers. So if it ever asks you, on some of the homework questions, it asks you how many solutions there are, you don't have to solve the entire equation. All you have to do is look at the discriminant, because that's what tells you how many solutions there are. So if b squared minus 4ac, if that value, whatever that comes out to be, if that is 0, that means I'm only going to get 1 solution. Okay, if b squared minus 4ac is a 0, I'm only going to get 1 answer. If b squared minus 4ac is a positive number, like 18 or 25 or 88, then I'm going to get 2 solutions. And if b squared minus 4ac is a negative number, so if I'm trying to take the square root of a negative, that means no solutions. And I want you to write this in your notebook. I want you to copy this down, because about half the homework questions, that's all you have to do. You don't have to use the entire equation. You can just use that part of the equation, all right? So let's do an example. Where's one? Okay, right here. Do we want to do that one? Sure. So 9x squared minus 6x plus 1. So a is 9, b is negative 6, and c is 1. Now, it's asking me to determine the number of real solutions. It's not asking me to solve it. It just wants to know how many solutions there are. So I'm not going to use the entire quadratic formula. I'm going to use this part right here. So b is negative 6 squared minus 4 times a, which is 9, times c, which is 1. So when I plug this in my calculator, I get what? 36 minus 36, which comes out to be 0. If I get 0, if b squared minus 4ac is 0, that means I'm going to take the square root of 0. So that means I only have 1 solution. Don't do the entire equation, just do the b squared minus 4ac if it's asking for the number of solutions. Or it likes to also word it, let me see if it's on here. Yeah, it likes to say find the number of x-intercepts. That's the same question that we just answered. That's the same question as how many solutions are there. All right, homework time. I want you to do 9 through 35 odds. And don't worry about the rest of this because I don't want you to do the story problems. We're going to do those together in class. But I want you to do 9 through 35 odds. If there's 1 or 2 story problems in there, go ahead and skip those. We'll worry about them as a class together in person. All right, good luck.